Welcome to Let's Talk Real Estate, and we're breaking down the fine print so you can make smart property decisions. Today, we're diving into landlord-tenant strata living, the ups and the downs, and the downright frustrating. Now, if you're dealing with the noisy neighbors, which some of us and high maintenance fees or surprise fines, this one's for you. We're going to get right into it.
We're joined today again by Sophia Bryan, Esquire, managing attorney at law at the Law Boss firm based in Kingston, Jamaica. Welcome
back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We loved last week.
Yes, we're so excited to get into this.
Can't wait.
Yes.
We were having an exciting discussion about the prices of homes, especially for young professionals
in Kingston.
Jeez. And yeah, you know, everybody's like, yeah, it's too expensive. How are we gonna manage? And yada yada yada. But let's get into this because that's an option. If you can't buy, then you have to rent because you have to live somewhere.
And there's no shaming that.
No, absolutely not.
That's what it is. At least I live somewhere. What?
Yeah.
Hello.
So this is something that obviously has been here from the start of time, from Jesus' walk. But many really think that Jesus didn't appear in Thompson. But anyways,
How you know?
well.
Probably taxes.
Right?
Also.
Security deposit is something that we all would have heard about before, right? So who's right? And here's the scenario. A tenant vacates and is shocked that most of their security deposit was used for quote-unquote repairs. How do we navigate that?
All right. So one of the things I encourage my clients to do is take a picture and video of how the property was when you came in. Make sure it's time stamped. And then when you are leaving, you ensure that you take videos and pictures. So if depending on the type of phone you have, it will show you the timestamp, the date and everything. And you immediately forward that, whether to the strata office, the landlord, or whomever is in charge of the property. So you can't be surprised because you would have known the state of the property before you left it.
Exactly.
And then if it comes to the test, you have a basis to dispute whatever charges are there with respect to your security deposit.
That's such a good point, Sophia, because I didn't do that. Because I remember when I went there to check on the spot it was a lawyer for my landlord. He had a list and he was taking stuff off and writing down like what condition things were in and so on. But he has that list. I don't think I got that.
Yeah,
so I should have insured.
You should have asked to use your phone to take a picture of the list just in case you had any issues with what was documented. And you probably should have asked them for a copy of it, so it would have been well within your right. Well, it would be a courtesy, really, for them to share that with you. But if you don't have any basis to dispute what they're, you're kind
of... You're just glad about boss. You finally find something. And they might take you out. I know what you mean. But it's probably in my email because I did send me some documents, right? But it's very good to do that because, as you said, you can compare how you leave the place to how you got it.
And if it was a furnished property, your security deposit is like 2 months rent. Who wants to just give that up like that? No, that's good money. Exactly. So just pause, collect your thoughts and document everything. And we also have to practice ending things the right way. And so it's not just about running to. You make sure you clear up your affairs with the existing person because you never know what can happen. And make sure you get back your money in your pocket as well.
That's very true too, because you may need to use them as a reference.
Exactly. That's also a part of it. And believe it or not, people do call. We always have the presumption that if you are, renting a certain type of property, if you're dealing with a realtor, for instance, they're going to want to do reference checks because there are financial implications if you try to get out of a lease early.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So let's talk about these leases here, right? But first, verbal lease agreements. Not even know some people still are doing this. Are they binding?
Yes.
Let's look at this scenario. A tenant claims they had a verbal agreement to rent for 1 year, but the landlord wants them out after 6 months.
So the beautiful thing about our law, so there are some things that our lawmakers got, right? And it's the Rent Restriction Act of Jamaica. And it's really biased towards the tenant. Nice. So if you started a relationship with somebody, you would have demonstrated the intent by paying your rent every month.
Right.
And so if they want you to exit early, they have to serve you a proper notice to quit. So they can't just say, oh, you have to leave. It was done verbally, so I'm verbally telling you no. They still have to go through the proper protocol, give you the 30 days notice.
Yes.
And if within that time it's impossible for you to find a space, then you're within your right to seek an extension of time. And if they're persisting the issue, then, that's a court dispute then. And then the judge is still going to give you time to find another place. So as long as it's reasonable and you're not, taking advantage of the situation. So just because it's verbal, it doesn't mean that they can treat you any kind of way.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you touched on notice, right? Because we've seen this a lot on social media as well. Eviction gone wrong.
Yes.
Matter of fact, just last week there was something in the news about this too.
I know
that
what
a
you're
landlord
talking
changes the
about.
locks, right? While the tenant is away, claiming that rent hasn't been paid.
Yes.
Who's in the right?
Right. So again, especially when it comes on to commercial type leases, the law is specific about how much notice the other parties to get.
Right.
So you cannot and re-enter a property just because, they didn't owe you rent. You're well within your right to get your rent as a landlord, but there's still a protocol that you have to follow. The tenant is still within their right to get quiet enjoyment. And if you breach that by doing things like putting locks on the gate, barring access, you're going to be sued.
Cut that.
You're going to be sued.
Yeah.
And so it's, these are self-help mechanisms and people want to use, bully tactics, for example. But when you're talking about millions of dollars and the basis upon which I'm renting your properties to facilitate a business, you can't operate like that because there are going to be legal implications for you. Right?
Yeah.
So quiet enjoyment is a must. Our law says if you're giving somebody notice, it can be for the basis of rent, whether you can say that, you need the property for repairs, you want it for your personal use. Those are some of the examples that the law accepts as a basis to give notice. And then you can still seek, compensation. You need to get back your rent. You get your rent, of course, but it can be the sole basis for giving somebody notice.
I see.
Yeah.
So is there any extent to which you cannot pay and then it becomes a lawful matter? Like, for example, you don't pay for an entire year.
Right. So if the basis upon which somebody has been given notice is that they haven't paid and say they pay, that notice is no longer valid because the reason you were giving the person notice is because there was unpaid rent.
Right.
All right. We've cured that issue now.
Yes.
But if you decide that you really want them out, regardless of the fact that they've paid rent, then you're going to have to make an application to the court. And
As a separate thing.
Yeah, as a separate thing, and you still have to give them a proper notice.
So what if the person hasn't paid you for a year?
Well, after the third month, you should have realized what's up and give them a notice.
So in that case, it's okay to say, hey, you haven't paid me for 3 months consecutively. I am going to terminate this.
Right, but
relationship.
if they pay you, that lease notice is no longer
Yes, so
valid.
if they say, oh my God, I forgot to pay you, and just pay you for 3 months, then you have to just...
Yeah, so it has to be complemented with some other reason why you want access to your property.
All right, all right. We'll be right back.
Find your perfect Kia model today. Visit our showrooms to join the movement that inspires. The temperature brought to you by Kia is
31 degrees Celsius right here in Kingston City and 30 degrees Celsius out west in Montego Bay. I see someone here asking, but what if they don't leave? How does the law protect the landlord, though? So someone's asking from the landlord perspective. We know that the law seems to be in favor of the tenant. Because, I mean, they are in a position to be taken advantage of in a lot of cases. So the law is, in a sense, protecting them from the power imbalance that's there. So from the landlord standpoint, that's where you have the court at your disposal. You seek a formal order for recovery of possession. And once you can demonstrate to the court that you want your property for your personal use, repairs, whatever the case may be, and you've gotten your formal order, if the person doesn't want to leave at that point in time, then you have all rights to use forcible entry at that point in time, because the court would have given you the authority to regain possession.
Yeah.
Rough. Yeah. Now let's talk about who handles repairs, right? This is a big topic.
Yes.
It is, man. Scenario here. The tenant stops paying rent, claiming the landlord hasn't fixed a leaking roof for months. And I was in a similar situation like this. I had an apartment in Portmore, and the roof was leaking. And I just couldn't anymore. But I did continue paying my rent until I left. But how does this work here? All
right. So in most well-prepared lease agreements, there is some consideration for basic repairs. Well, granted, our roof is not a basic repair. It's understandable. But you cannot pay the people them rent, because you're still living there. they're still offering that service of
Okay.
a place to live.
So they didn't. So it's not like they were saying we're gonna give you a perfect roof. So even though you're in there getting wet, you still gotta pay us because you're in there.
Yes, you still have to pay the
She's a
rent.
piece
So
of
the
rock.
conversation that you need to have, if the landlord is not responsive, and it's preventing you from your enjoyment of the property, then I would say you have a basis to possibly, if you can afford to repair it or repair so that it's good enough to live and deduct that from the rent. If they're unresponsive, I would say you're well within your right to do so. And I imagine that if the landlord really pushed the issue and brought it to court for that, I don't see how, from an equitable standpoint, they would win that sort of dispute. So you cannot pay the rent.
You still have to pay.
You still have
So
to pay
you still have to pay the rent.
Even though you get wet up and you have to
Okay.
extra in.
But what if it is that
That's a
they
grand part.
are, because a lot of people have been doing this where, I see something broken in the home, you're not fixing it, so I'm going to decide, all right, then it costs 10 grand.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to send you the receipt.
Yeah.
And deduct that $10,000
Yeah.
out of the rent. What about situations like those?
So usually you want to get permission before you go ahead and do that. Just from the standpoint of trying to be in a harmonious sort of situation. Because there are instances where maybe the owner of the property can't necessarily afford to pay it outright. And so you can have that conversation with them. But I've seen instances where people had said, okay, I will pay the thing up front and then deduct X amount from my rent over a certain number of months because they understand the situation. And some people have reneged on that sort of agreement. So if you're uncomfortable, you just have to make arrangements to leave, but you still have to pay the rent because that's an obligation that you have regardless of the state of the property.
Pay rent.
Yeah.
Some contracts, some lease agreements state in it that you're responsible for repairs, like certain repairs.
Minor repairs, like
Minor
if it's up to a
repairs.
certain amount of money. I'm not fond of those kind of terms.
I'm not fond of them either.
I personally, I'm not signing to something like that personally because it's your property regardless of the amount. You should fix it. I can understand where it said that I should pay up front and you reimburse me.
Right.
I can understand with that, but to put that on the tenant, I think is unreasonable. But I think what a clause like that is trying to prevent is people that just abuse the process. So like if they're paying over 100,000 for rent, for instance, they think that everything should be pristine.
Yes.
And so the least little thing, they're calling the landlord. And I think people are just trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
But it's usually the good that suffers for the bad in situations like that. You know?
Now, okay, so commercial lease. Yes, can everybody know? We actually look it. So, commercial lease pitfalls. Now, a small business signs a commercial lease without legal advice, which you shouldn't do, and discovers hidden clauses. What do we do?
All right. So, you know what I find interesting? Somebody would be running a multi-million-dollar enterprise, collecting revenue, and they're cheap on getting legal advice.
I don't understand it.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't.
Right? You can't go to the court and say, oh, I didn't know. You literally have to put your negotiation skills to the test at that point in time and try to wiggle your way out of it, because typically commercial leases are for 24 months and onwards, and there is an obligation to pay for the duration of the lease. And so it has to be overwhelming where you put your case that, look, this is untenable, I didn't know that this was there, and you put your negotiation skills to the test. Aside from that, you really are obligated to pay for the duration of the lease, and you can be sued for specific performance based on how difficult the persons on the other side want to be.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So really, guys, you're not supposed to get yourself in them kind of rigmarole. I mean, sit with your lawyer and go through these clauses, because a lot of them will sneak up on you.
Indeed.
Yes, yes. Now let's talk about subletting without permission. Yeah, a lot of people like to do this,
Yes,
especially
yes.
people that travel, going away for vacation.
Yes.
Apartment is sitting there for 2 months. They're like, why don't I just get somebody to sit in,
Yeah.
pay me some money? Now, scenario here: a tenant sublets a room to someone else without notifying the landlord, who now wants to terminate the lease.
All right, so boy, the person at sublet is just in a really bad situation.
Can you imagine? Like, how did I get? I just want somewhere to live.
Yeah.
Like, that's all I want. Somewhere to live.
There's a bad situation because the obligation is to the original person that signed the
Yes.
lease.
Yes.
The landlord has no obligation. So what they're gonna have to ride on is that the person sticks out and says the landlord has to follow the proper protocol to get them out, and so that would probably allow them to buy a little bit of time. But the reality is, for persons who are looking to lease property, especially when it's of a certain value, you have to do your due diligence checks. Who is the owner? Nowadays, when you're trying to transfer utilities in your name, you have to get a copy of the title.
Yes.
And a letter from the owner or the proprietor of the property. And so if you're not in a position to get that, then you know that something is fishy.
Something wrong.
Right? I know that, students, for instance, they're in a bind and they're trying to find something quick.
Yeah.
So I think if they're going into this kind of situation, you probably should just have it in the back of your mind that prepare to leave anytime now.
Yes.
Because chances are, if you can't get the utilities in your name, water or light, you're probably in a situation where you are subletting.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Now this is another one, especially for a lot of, students are oftentimes in this type of situation, and we're talking about ending a lease early.
Yeah.
Who bears the cost? Here's the scenario. A tenant wants to leave 6 months into a 12-month lease, after possibly losing a job.
Yeah.
Right? So what do we do then?
Yeah, that's a rough one again. It boils down to negotiation, because if you can't pay, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Me not have work.
Because then what, you're supposed to pay for the remaining 6 months?
Yes, you're required to pay it.
Samantha.
So you depending on the relationship that you have with the landlord, because I've seen instances where people are sympathetic. You remember when COVID came around, persons were, wanting. So you have to be upfront about the situation. You can't wait till you miss rent 2-3 months before you say, oh, shucks, I'm actually unemployed at this time. Give me some leniency. You have to be upfront about that and come to some type of arrangement, and be prepared to terminate a little early and find alternatives. So you really have to have open dialogue. But the landlord might still bring it to court. So you have to prepare yourself for that.
No, it's the sort of thing where you really have to be on your P's and Q's and just be very sure before you sign a lease.
Yes, you have to be. And Jamaica is getting more and more sophisticated where credit report checks are concerned.
Yes.
So realtors now have the ability to go and make checks. By paying a very nominal fee, they can go and see. And so depending on who you rented from, like if it was a company, they can put something on your credit report and make it very difficult for you to find alternative places to live. So you have to handle those situations very carefully. If it's a case of hardship, be very upfront about it as quickly as possible, but just know that the financial obligation doesn't go away simply because you're in a state of hardship.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes, well, pets in a no pet strata. Some people they love their little animals. They love their little dogs. They want to have their cats with them. A lot of them are emotional support animals and all of that, right? But I mean, listen. So let's look at this scenario. A tenant keeps a small dog in an apartment despite a no pets by law. The landlord is fined by the strata, and neighbors are complaining.
Yes. All right. So in a situation like that, you just have to pack up once a strata finds out. So a strata body is almost like a citizen association or a club for an apartment complex. They have a secretary / administrative officer, they have a treasurer or accountant, and there are bylaws that guide how the strata should be operated. And so there is something in the strata bylaws that says if the owner doesn't honor these particular requirements, they can actually ask them to leave. They can
ask the owner to leave?
They can force a sale of the property. So I don't think anybody's gonna want to put themselves in a situation like that.
Right.
So that overrides to an extent any lease arrangement that you have, because it's under the umbrella of those bylaws for the strata. So that circumstance is the only place where I would say the Rent Restriction Act, there's a competition there between who is right. But at the end of the day, the owner has to abide by what the strata bylaws say.
No pets, guys.
Yeah.
Listen to me, no
But
man.
I do find a lot of apartments are no pets, though.
Yeah.
I really wonder about that. I think it's because with the prevailing short-term rental thing, pets can be a little bit noisy sometimes, and maybe they don't want to clean up. Sometimes owners don't want to do the necessary things to clean up properly after their pets. Well, that's for me. That's a big pet peeve. You know, people will walk their animals, but don't pick up after them, and so people want to maintain the aesthetics of their building, and you can't fault them for that.
Not true, indeed. So sorry, guys.
Trust me, Sophia.
Move the country.
Move the country.
Yes.
Put the dog them and the cat them in the yard. We don't got country. We don't have a problem with them. That's something there. You understand? But if you live in people in my apartment complex, yes, I mean them say no pets and no pets. And that's just it. It's been a very, very informative conversation. I can't believe the time we're not heard it. Because we're really and truly, I'm actually looking on YouTube, and people are just saying it's really nice to listen to the conversation here. Very empowering indeed, very informative. It's a very important topic. So we're gonna see you again next week.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
Can't wait.
How can they find you on social media?
So Law Boss Jamaica, Sophia Bryan JA. So once you type in Law Boss Jamaica, you will see me pop up. You see this wonderful face. And the contact number 990-7313 via WhatsApp or direct call.
All right, wonderful. Okay, we're going to hand things over to you, DJ Jerome. Here we go.